The Duke believed his son was born fragile, not tragic fragile, the kind society sighs over at tea. No, the kind that makes men avert their eyes because it feels like looking at guilt. For 3 years, Ethan Rogers had suffered every day, and every day the household had learned new ways to explain it without doing anything that might stain the family's name. In the drawing room, it was poor health. In the servants' corridor, it was a punishment from heaven. In Dr. Richard Parry's neat handwriting, it was degeneration, nerves, unfortunate constitution. In the nursery wing, it was simply screaming. It was the kind of sound that didn't belong in a grand estate. It didn't match the velvet drapes or the marble floors or the portraits of proud men staring down from gilded frames like they'd never made a mistake in their lives. Ethan's cries cut through all of it. Honest, ugly, impossible to ignore. So they ignored it anyway. Hello everyone! Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. We'd also love to know, what did you think of our new voice-over voice? Did it bring the story to life for you? Your feedback really helps us improve. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. The iron gates of Rogers Hall rose like judgment against the winter sky when Miss Amelia Pearson arrived, suitcase in hand, gloves damp from the fog. She wasn't the sort of woman people expected to walk into a duke's home and matter. Not with her modest coat, her careful manners, and that quiet steadiness in her gaze that made you feel oddly like she'd already noticed what you were trying to hide. Mrs. Henshaw, the housekeeper, met her at the servants' entrance as if Amelia were a delivery rather than a person. "You're the governess," Mrs. Henshaw said, not quite a question. Her mouth looked permanently disappointed. "Yes, ma'am," Amelia replied, even though she wasn't a child to be scolded. She'd learned long ago that pride was expensive. "Then listen closely," Mrs. Henshaw said, stepping nearer. "You are here to teach when you are permitted, and to soothe only when instructed. You will not improvise, you will not ask questions in the wrong rooms. You will not wake Lady Charlotte." Amelia blinked. "Lady Charlotte?" A faint tightening at Mrs. Henshaw's eyes. "The Duke's intended. She keeps the household delicate. And the nursery is challenging." "Challenging," Amelia repeated softly, as though tasting the word. Mrs. Henshaw's glance sharpened. "If the boy bites, you do not strike. If he screams, you do not panic. If his grace commands distance, you obey." "And if he's suffering?" Amelia asked, before she could stop herself. Mrs. Henshaw stared at her like Amelia had spoken in church. "The family does not discuss suffering," she said finally. "They discuss decorum." Amelia should have been afraid. To be honest, she was. But beneath that fear was something else. Something stubborn and strangely calm, like the part of her that had survived hardship was unimpressed by polished cruelty. She was led through corridors lined with paintings and quiet. Too quiet. Even the candles seemed to burn carefully. Rogers Hall was elegant but predatory. Fog-damp iron gates outside, chandeliers that felt like surveillance inside, corridors that smelled of lavender polish trying to bury something metallic underneath. And then she met the Duke. Scott Rogers stood near the library archway, tall and immaculately dressed, a man carved into control. His presence didn't need shouting, it simply arrived and expected the room to adjust. "Miss Pearson," he said, voice low, precise. Amelia curtsied properly, though she felt his attention like heat. Not romantic heat, not yet, the kind that tests you. "They tell me you've worked with difficult children," he continued. "I've worked with frightened children," Amelia corrected, still respectful. "There's a difference." Something flickered in his eyes, a fast, annoyed interest, like he didn't want to agree, but couldn't help it. Behind him, Lady Charlotte Short drifted into view, pale and perfect in silk, wearing innocence the way wealthy women wore perfume, generously and for effect. "His Grace worries too much," Charlotte said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Ethan simply needs discipline and quiet. Amelia noticed how she said Ethan, not your son. And Amelia noticed the Duke didn't correct her, not out loud anyway. It was later, when Amelia finally stood outside the nursery door, that the truth of the house pressed in. The air smelled wrong, not just stale, not just closed. There was something metallic beneath the powder and polish, faint as a secret. When the door opened, the darkness inside felt deliberate. Ethan was in the corner, small in a nest of blankets, his hair damp with sweat, his face turned away, as if eye contact itself might hurt. When Amelia took one gentle step forward, he flinched so hard his whole body jerked, and a sharp sound tore out of him, too intense for a normal child. Amelia froze. A child doesn't learn fear like that by accident. She set down her things quietly, doing the safe tasks first, opening curtains just a crack, changing water, straightening sheets. She spoke to him as if he were real, not a family embarrassment. "I'm Amelia," she said softly. I won't grab you. I won't rush you. I just want you to breathe." Ethan's eyes flicked toward her, wild with panic, then away, and in that moment Amelia felt it, the kind of anger that comes when you realize pain has been managed like a household inconvenience. Illness doesn't smell like metal. Someone has tried to clean a secret. Amelia didn't rush. Over the next days she narrated softly, like calming a storm. She cleaned, observed, and gained tiny trust, a blink, a breath, a lessened recoil. But the patterns she saw troubled her deeply. Ethan held his neck stiffly, always tilted to one side. Tremors ran through his legs when he tried to stand. He screamed when touched at one specific area near the base of his skull. He didn't sleep deeply. He collapsed from exhaustion, not comfort. She began keeping mental notes. The reactions weren't random. They were specific, predictable, like his body was protecting one particular spot. One afternoon, while changing his linens, Amelia found herself thinking absurd thoughts. The curtains in this room were heavier than most families' winter coats. The silver candlesticks on the mantel could feed a village for a month, yet the medicine cabinet held only willow bark tea and lavender oil, nothing for true pain. It was during one of these quiet observations that Duke Scott appeared at the nursery door. He didn't knock. Dukes didn't need to. Amelia stood quickly, smoothing her apron. "Miss Pearson," he said, his voice careful. "How does he fare?" "He suffers, Your Grace," Amelia replied honestly. "But he is trying." Scott stepped into the room, and Amelia noticed how Ethan's breathing changed. Not with fear exactly, more like resignation, as if his father's presence was just another thing to endure. The Duke looked at his son with an expression Amelia couldn't quite name. Guilt, helplessness, love buried under protocol. "Dr. Parry says it is his constitution," Scott said quietly. "That some children are simply born this way." "With respect, Your Grace," Amelia said carefully, "I have worked with many children. I have never seen a constitution that screams like this." Scott's jaw tightened. "You overstep?" "Perhaps," Amelia admitted, "but someone must." Their eyes met. The air between them felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. He was close enough that she could smell his cologne, something woodsy and expensive. Close enough that she noticed the faint scar above his left eyebrow. He reached toward the blanket near Ethan's feet, and for a moment his hand hovered near Amelia's. Neither moved. The moment stretched, taut and dangerous. Then Scott pulled back, clearing his throat. "Continue your work, Miss Pearson, but do not presume to diagnose what trained physicians cannot." He left quickly, and Amelia released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That evening, Lady Charlotte accidentally appeared during Amelia's rounds. She swept into the nursery like she owned it, which Amelia supposed she soon would. "Still coddling the boy, I see," Charlotte said lightly, examining her gloves rather than Ethan. "I'm caring for him, my lady," Amelia corrected gently. Charlotte's smile was sharp as glass. "Care, discipline, some cannot tell the difference. The late Duchess was too soft. It's why the boy is as he is." Amelia bit her tongue, hard. "His Grace values order, Miss Pearson," Charlotte continued, "not sentiment. If you cannot provide results, there are other governesses, quieter ones, more obedient ones. The threat was clear. After Charlotte left, Amelia sat beside Ethan's bed. The boy was awake, watching her with those golden eyes that looked too old for his young face. "You're safe with me," Amelia whispered. "I promise." Ethan stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, so slowly it nearly broke her heart, he leaned his head just slightly toward her hand. It was trust. Fragile, tentative, but real. Amelia reached out carefully and wiped a tear from his cheek. He flinched, but didn't pull away, and when her fingers accidentally brushed near the back of his neck, he jerked so violently he nearly fell from the bed, a strangled cry tearing from his throat. Amelia caught him, steadying him, her heart pounding, and in that moment, supporting his small, trembling body, she felt it. Something hard, something wrong, something that didn't belong beneath a child's skin. Amelia knew she was about to break the most important rule Mrs. Henshaw had given her. But she couldn't unsee what her fingers had felt. She couldn't unhear Ethan's screams. She prepared carefully. A warm cloth, a comb, a small pair of tweezers from her sewing kit. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered the items. "Ethan," she whispered, kneeling beside his bed, "I need to look at your neck. I think something is hurting you, something we can remove." He watched her with wide, terrified eyes. But he didn't run. Maybe he was too exhausted. Maybe, somewhere deep down, he wanted the pain to stop more than he feared what she might do. Amelia moved slowly. She dampened the cloth and gently cleaned the area at the base of his skull. The skin there was hot, angry, swollen. The hair was matted into thick clumps. She began to part the hair, and Ethan whimpered, but held still. And then she saw it. The skin was red and festering, yellow with infection. But in the center of the inflamed area was a tiny, dark point, almost invisible against his brown hair. Metal. Amelia's breath caught. She reached for the tweezers, her hands shaking now. "Hold still, sweetheart," she breathed. "Just one moment." She gripped the tiny dark point and pulled. Ethan screamed, a sound of pure agony that echoed off the stone walls and seemed to shake the very foundation of Roger's Hall. But Amelia didn't stop. She kept pulling, steady and sure. The object slid out. It kept coming, and coming. It wasn't a splinter, it wasn't a thorn. It was a needle, a long, thin, silver needle, at least 3 inches in length, coated at the tip with a black tar-like substance. Amelia dropped it onto the metal wash basin with a clang. The substance on the tip hissed faintly, bubbling where it touched the water. Poison. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't illness. Someone had deliberately driven a poison needle into a child's spine to keep him in constant crippling pain, to make him appear weak, unfit, damaged. "Who did this to you?" Amelia whispered, tears streaming down her face. Ethan had gone quiet. Not the silence of fear, the silence of relief. His breathing was different, easier. His eyes, for the first time since she'd met him, looked clear. And then the door slammed open. Amelia spun around, instinctively placing herself between Ethan and whoever had entered. Standing in the doorway was Lady Charlotte Short, her perfect face arranged in an expression of horror. Behind her stood Duke Scott Rogers, his eyes immediately locking onto the scene. Amelia kneeling, Ethan bleeding, tweezers in her hand. "What have you done?" Charlotte gasped, rushing forward. She's hurting him, Your Grace. Look, she's stabbed the poor child." "No," Amelia cried, holding up the needle. "No, Your Grace, please, you must listen. I pulled this from his neck. Someone put it there. Someone has been poisoning him." Scott stared at the blood on Amelia's hands, at his son, trembling and crying, at the tweezers. He didn't see the needle. His eyes were fixed on the blood. "Step away from my son," Scott said, his voice deadly quiet. "Your Grace, please," Amelia begged. Look at the basin. The needle is there. It's coated in wolfsbane or something worse. That's why he's been suffering. But Charlotte was already moving. She rushed forward, reaching for Ethan, and in her haste, her silk sleeves swept across the small table, knocking the wash basin to the floor. Water splashed everywhere. The needle clattered across the stone and rolled, spinning under the heavy wooden wardrobe. "You clumsy fool!" Charlotte spat at Amelia. "You've upset him so badly he's shaking. Look what you've done!" "There was a needle," Amelia shouted, desperation making her reckless. "A silver needle coated in poison. That's why he screams. That's why he can't move properly." "Someone buried it in his spine." The room went silent. Scott slowly turned to face her fully. He was terrifying in his control, a man who had commanded soldiers and conquered territories. "A needle," he repeated, his voice ice, "in my son's spine." "You are suggesting someone in this household, in my home, tortured my heir." "I am not suggesting it, Your Grace," Amelia said, her voice shaking but firm. "I am telling you what I found. It rolled under the wardrobe. Please, check." Scott's eyes narrowed. He looked at Charlotte. She met his gaze, her blue eyes wide and glistening with tears. "Kaelin, surely you don't believe this madness," Charlotte whispered, using his first name like an intimacy. "Dr. Parry has examined Ethan dozens of times. He has a degenerative condition. Everyone knows this. She's clearly disturbed. She hurt him, and now she's inventing stories." Charlotte stepped closer to the Duke, placing her hand on his arm. "She smells of desperation. Perhaps she thought if she could cure him, you'd reward her. Give her money, status." Scott looked back at Amelia. He could smell her fear, but underneath it, something else. Conviction? Truth? Or just the stubbornness of a woman trying to save herself? "Guard," Scott called. 2 men appeared at the door instantly. "Search under the wardrobe," Scott commanded. Amelia's heart leapt. He was listening. The guard knelt, reaching under the heavy furniture. He swept his arm back and forth. He pulled out dust, a lost button, a dried flower. "Nothing else, Your Grace," the guard reported, standing. Amelia's blood turned to ice. "It was there," she whispered. "I saw it roll." She looked at Charlotte. The lady was watching her with a small, satisfied smile. She'd moved it. Somehow. Magic? A kick when no one was looking? It didn't matter. The evidence was gone. "Liar!" Charlotte hissed. "No!" Amelia lunged forward. "Check again. Check the wound on his neck. It's a puncture, a perfect circle." "Enough!" Scott's command was like a physical blow, silencing the room. He looked at Amelia, and she saw it. Doubt. Not about Charlotte. About her. "Dr. Parry will examine the prince immediately," Scott said, his voice heavy. "As for you—" He paused, and Amelia saw something flicker in his eyes. Confusion. His wolf was stirring, reacting to her scent in a way that made no sense. Vanilla and rain. It calmed him even as he tried to stay angry. He shook it off. "Take her to the holding room," Scott ordered. "If Dr. Parry finds evidence of abuse, she will stand trial." If you're still with me, we're just getting to the most intense part of this story. If you want to see how deep this conspiracy goes and whether Amelia can prove the truth before it's too late, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me, do you think the Duke will believe Amelia in time, or will Lady Charlotte succeed in her terrible plan? Your engagement truly helps this channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Now let's see what happens next. The holding room wasn't quite a dungeon, but it wasn't far off. It was a small stone chamber in the older part of Roger's Hall, used for servants who'd committed theft or other household crimes before they were sent to the magistrate. Amelia sat on the narrow bench, her wrists sore from where the guards had gripped her. She wasn't shackled, but the heavy door was locked from the outside. She replayed the scene over and over. The needle, the poison, Charlotte's perfectly timed entrance. The vanishing evidence. This wasn't random cruelty. This was planned, precise, and Charlotte was at the center of it. Meanwhile, in the brightly lit examination room, Dr. Richard Parry nervously attended to Prince Ethan. Duke Scott stood rigid, his arms crossed, watching every movement. Lady Charlotte hovered nearby, her expression perfectly arranged into maternal concern. "What is it, Doctor?" Scott demanded. Dr. Parry carefully examined the wound at the base of Ethan's neck. The boy was quieter than usual. He whimpered when touched, but he didn't snarl or snap. "Your Grace," Dr. Parry began, his voice uncertain, "the prince has certainly been through trauma, and I have found a puncture wound, fresh, at the base of the neck near the upper spine." Scott inhaled sharply. "A bite?" "No, Your Grace. A bite would show teeth marks, perhaps tearing. This is perfectly round. Like a thin, sharp instrument penetrated the skin." The room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "And is there a foreign object present?" Scott asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "No, Your Grace. I see no object now. But the skin around the entry point is inflamed and shows signs of systemic poisoning, specifically exposure to wolf's bane or a similar toxin." Charlotte moved quickly, placing a calming hand on Scott's arm. "Carlin, the maid stabbed him today. She used a poison needle to make him sick and then tried to blame us. The real question is how she smuggled such a thing past your guards. It was brilliant, really. The poison is fresh. The needle is gone. The governess is guilty." Scott took a shuddering breath. He wanted to believe Amelia. Something about her steadiness, her defiance, called to him in ways he didn't understand, but the facts were damning. "The X-rays, Parry," Scott said. "In all your examinations these past 3 years, did you ever detect metal in my son's body?" Dr. Parry went pale. He shuffled through his documents. "No, Your Grace, never. I have the records. Nothing abnormal was detected." Scott nodded slowly. If the needle had been there for years, the old examinations would have shown it. Therefore, it must have been introduced recently by the governess. "Keep him sedated until we resolve this matter," Scott ordered, "and summon the magistrate. The governess will face formal charges," as Scott strode from the room. Charlotte watched him go. Her mask of concern slipped, just for a moment, into a smile of cold satisfaction. She turned to Dr. Parry, who was trembling. "Doctor," she said sweetly, "about those X-rays. I trust they're filed securely?" "Yes, Lady Charlotte," Parry stammered. "Good. If any of those sheets happen to show even the faintest speck of silver near the prince's spine, I trust you'll handle it appropriately. After all, we wouldn't want anyone to think you'd been incompetent all these years, would we?" Dr. Parry's face went white. "No, my lady." "Excellent." Charlotte patted his shoulder like a favored pet. "You've always been so reliable." Later that evening, Scott found himself walking toward the holding room. He told himself it was to question the prisoner, to understand her motive, to find the truth. But truthfully, he didn't know why he was going. When he opened the door, Amelia stood immediately, her eyes blazing with determination despite her circumstances. "Your Grace," she said, "please just listen." "I have listened, Miss Pearson," Scott replied, though he didn't move to leave. "And all I hear are accusations without proof." "The proof was there. Lady Charlotte moved it." "Lady Charlotte has served this household faithfully for 2 years, Scott said, but even to his own ears, the words sounded hollow. "Why would she harm my son?" "Because as long as Ethan is unfit, she controls you," Amelia said bluntly. "And if he were to die, declared too weak to inherit, where would the title go? To your brother's line, or to a new duchess, and whatever children she might bear you?" Scott's hands curled into fists. "You go too far." "Do I?" Amelia stepped closer, unafraid. "Look at his eyes, Your Grace. Really look. Since I removed that needle, has he screamed? Has he thrashed?" Scott was silent. She was right. Ethan had been calmer. "Why does my presence anger you?" Amelia asked quietly. "Is it because I'm lying? Or because some part of you knows I'm telling the truth?" They stood close now. Too close. Scott could smell lavender in her hair, could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. His wolf stirred again, whispering words he didn't want to hear. Mate. Protect. Believe her. He stepped back sharply, as if burned. Dr. Parry will deliver his full report tomorrow, Scott said, roughly. If you are innocent, it will show. And if Lady Charlotte has already ensured it won't? Amelia challenged. Scott had no answer. He left quickly, the door slamming behind him, leaving Amelia alone in the cold stone room. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the image of his son's clear golden eyes, or the memory of Amelia's steady voice saying, "He's not broken, he's been hurt." The next morning, Rogers Hall received an unexpected visitor, Lady Agatha Boyle, a sharp-witted dowager with connections to half the noble families in England and a reputation for seeing through polite lies like they were made of glass. She arrived in a gleaming carriage, dressed impeccably in deep purple silk, and announced herself as if she owned the place. Mrs. Henshaw nearly fainted, trying to prepare proper refreshments. Lady Agatha swept into the drawing-room, where Duke Scott and Lady Charlotte were taking breakfast, her eyes missing nothing, the tension in Scott's shoulders, the forced brightness in Charlotte's smile, the unusual quiet from the nursery wing. "Your Grace," Agatha said, settling into the best chair without waiting for an invitation. "I've come to check on young Ethan. I heard such distressing rumours in town." "Rumours?" Scott asked carefully. "That the poor child has taken a turn, that there's been some sort of incident with the new governess, that Dr. Parry has been summoned at odd hours." Agatha sipped her tea delicately. "If silence were medicine, your son would be cured by now." Charlotte laughed lightly. "Lady Agatha, you mustn't listen to servants' gossip. The governess was dismissed for improper conduct. Nothing more." "Dismissed or detained?" Agatha's eyes sharpened. "There is a difference." Scott shifted uncomfortably. He'd forgotten how little escaped Lady Agatha's notice. "But the matter is being investigated," Scott said firmly. "The governess made serious accusations." "Against whom?" Agatha asked innocently. The silence stretched. "Against the household," Charlotte supplied smoothly. "She claimed poor Ethan's condition was deliberate harm rather than his unfortunate constitution. Clearly the woman is disturbed." "How fascinating," Agatha murmured. "And did she provide any evidence for this disturbing claim?" "She claimed to have found a needle," Scott said reluctantly. "But no such object was recovered." Agatha set down her teacup with a soft click. "A needle? In the child? How medieval." "It's nonsense," Charlotte said quickly. "Dr. Parry has confirmed the boy has a degenerative condition. The governess simply couldn't accept that some children cannot be helped." Lady Agatha studied Charlotte with the intensity of a cat watching a mousehole. "How fortunate young Ethan has you to speak for him, Lady Charlotte. Tell me, how is the dear boy today? Better or worse since this needle business?" "About the same," Charlotte said. "Actually," Scott interrupted, frowning, "he's been calmer, sleeping more peacefully." Agatha's eyebrow rose. "How remarkable. His condition improves the moment the governess is accused of worsening it. What an extraordinary coincidence." Charlotte's smile tightened. "Children are unpredictable, Lady Agatha." "Indeed they are. As are ambitious women." Agatha stood gracefully. "I wonder, Your Grace, if I might meet this scandalous governess. I do so enjoy hearing both sides of a story." "That's not necessary," Charlotte began. "I think it's an excellent idea," Scott said suddenly, surprising everyone, including himself. Charlotte's face remained pleasant, but her eyes flashed with something cold. Within the hour, Amelia was brought to a small parlour. She was dishevelled but dignified, her green eyes alert and wary. Lady Agatha studied her with open curiosity. "You must be the dangerous criminal I've heard so much about." "I am a governess who tried to help a suffering child," Amelia replied quietly. "Tell me what you found," Agatha commanded. And Amelia did. She described Ethan's symptoms in detail, the pattern of pain, the discovery of the hard object, the long silver needle coated in black poison. Agatha listened without interrupting. When Amelia finished, the older woman sat back thoughtfully. "You realize, my dear, that, without proof, you sound quite mad." I know, Amelia said. But I also know what I saw, and I know that boy is suffering less since that needle was removed. Interesting. Agatha turned to Scott, who had been listening from the doorway. Your Grace, I have a suggestion. I would like to summon Inspector Thomas Hayden, purely as a favor to me. He's investigating some missing items from my estate, and while he's here, perhaps he could provide an objective assessment. It was a transparent excuse, but it was also brilliant. Charlotte couldn't object to helping Lady Agatha without seeming suspicious. Of course, Scott agreed. Inspector Hayden arrived that evening, a methodical man with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness. He interviewed everyone separately. He noticed things. Why had Dr. Parry never taken X-rays focused on the upper spine specifically? Why were past medical records vague about treatments? Why did Lady Charlotte seem to monitor access to the prince so carefully? When Hayden spoke with Dr. Parry, the physician was sweating despite the cool evening air. You've treated the prince for 3 years, Hayden noted. Yet, you never detected foreign objects or poisoning until yesterday. The symptoms were consistent with a genetic condition, Parry stammered. Were they? Or were they consistent with what you were told to diagnose? Parry's hands shook. I don't understand what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, Doctor. I'm simply noting inconsistencies. That night, Scott couldn't sleep. He found himself outside the nursery, watching Ethan through the cracked door. The boy was resting peacefully for the first time in memory. His breathing was even. His face, for once, looked like a child's face rather than a map of pain. He's better, a soft voice said behind him. Scott turned to find Amelia, escorted by a guard but clearly brought to the nursery at someone's orders. Lady Agatha's, he suspected. Miss Pearson, Scott acknowledged. I didn't hurt him, Amelia said quietly. I would never hurt a child. Then who did? Scott asked, and the question was genuine, desperate. Someone who benefits from his suffering, Amelia replied. Someone who needs him to appear unfit. Someone close enough to access him regularly without suspicion. Their eyes met. The truth was there, hovering between them, too dangerous to speak aloud. Scott reached out, almost unconsciously, and his fingers brushed Amelia's hand. The contact sent a shock through both of them. Warmth, recognition, something that felt inevitable and impossible all at once. If you're right, Scott whispered, then I have been blind, willfully blind. You trusted the wrong person, Amelia said gently. That's not the same as being cruel. For a moment they stood there, hands barely touching, breathing the same air. Scott found himself leaning closer, drawn by something he couldn't name and didn't want to resist. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. They sprang apart just as Lady Charlotte appeared, her expression pleasant, but her eyes sharp as she took in the scene. How domestic, Charlotte observed coolly. The Duke and the accused standing so close. I hope I'm not interrupting anything improper. You're not, Scott said, but his voice lacked conviction. Charlotte smiled. Good, because I'd hate for there to be any more scandals. One governess attacking the prince is quite enough, don't you think? She glided away, leaving poison in her wake. But Amelia had seen it. The flicker of panic in Charlotte's eyes. She was losing control, and desperate people made mistakes. The next morning, Amelia was moved from the holding room to a better chamber, thanks to Lady Agatha's insistence that treating suspects like criminals before trial is terribly unbecoming. But Charlotte wasn't finished. That afternoon, Ethan suddenly took a turn. He began crying again, thrashing in his bed, his symptoms returning with frightening intensity. Mrs. Henshaw found him and immediately summoned everyone. You see, Charlotte announced as they gathered in the nursery. The governess must have done something else to him. Perhaps she poisoned him before she was caught. But Amelia, escorted by Inspector Hayden, saw something Charlotte didn't expect her to see. On the table beside Ethan's bed was a fresh glass of water. The same table where Charlotte had been standing moments before, according to the frightened maid. Inspector, Amelia said quietly, test that water. Charlotte's face went pale. How dare you? Test it, Scott commanded. Hayden took the glass carefully, He sniffed it, then dipped a silver spoon into the liquid. The spoon tarnished immediately, turning black. Wolf's bane. The room went silent. "That's impossible," Charlotte breathed. "I only brought him fresh water." She stopped, realizing her mistake. "You brought him the water," Scott repeated slowly. "Personally?" "I was being helpful." Charlotte's composure was cracking. "The maids are so unreliable." "Lady Charlotte," Inspector Hayden said calmly, "I'm going to need to search your chambers." "You have no right." "I have every right when a child's life is at stake." What they found in Charlotte's rooms destroyed her carefully constructed innocence. A hidden box containing 3 more silver needles, a vial of concentrated wolfsbane, and most damning of all, a journal. In Charlotte's own handwriting, she had documented her plan. Make the heir appear unfit, ensure her position as Duchess, control the estate through Scott's grief and guilt. When confronted, Charlotte's mask finally shattered completely. "I did it for you," she screamed at Scott, all elegance gone. "For us, that boy was never going to be strong enough. He would have ruined everything you built. I was helping." "Helping?" Scott's voice was deadly quiet. "You tortured my son." "I secured your legacy," Charlotte insisted. "With him gone, we could have had strong children, worthy heirs." "He is my son," Scott said, and each word fell like a hammer. "And you are nothing." Charlotte lunged at him, her nails like claws, but the guards caught her easily. As she was dragged away, still screaming accusations and justifications, Scott stood motionless, staring at his hands like he'd never seen them before. Amelia approached carefully. "Your Grace." "I let this happen," Scott interrupted, his voice hollow. "For years, I saw the suffering and I chose to believe comfortable lies. You didn't know." "I should have known." He turned to her, and Amelia saw tears in his eyes. "You knew in days. You, a stranger with no medical training, saw what I refused to see." "Because I wasn't afraid of the truth," Amelia said gently, "and because I had nothing to lose by believing him." Scott truly looked at her for the first time, not as a servant, not as an employee, but as the woman who had saved his son when everyone else, including him, had failed. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said quietly. "Perhaps not," Amelia agreed, "but Ethan deserves your presence. He needs his father, Your Grace, not your guilt." Scott nodded slowly. Then, without thinking, he reached for her hand and held it tightly. "Stay," he said. "Please, not as a governess. As whatever you're willing to be. He trusts you, and I—" He stopped, the words too dangerous, too soon. But Amelia understood. She squeezed his hand gently. "I'll stay." They stood together, hands joined, as dawn light filtered through the nursery windows where Ethan slept peacefully for the first time in 3 years, finally free of the needle that had stolen his childhood. The trial of Lady Charlotte Short became the scandal of the season. Nobility from across England whispered behind fans and over tea about the woman who had tortured a duke's heir in pursuit of a title. Inspector Hayden presented the evidence methodically: the needles, the poison, the journal. Dr. Parry, faced with the truth, broke down and confessed that Charlotte had pressured him to misdiagnose Ethan, threatening to reveal past medical mistakes that could have cost him his license. Mrs. Henshaw admitted she'd suspected something was wrong, but had been too afraid of losing her position to speak up. Charlotte, for her part, showed no remorse. Even in chains, she maintained that she'd done what was necessary. "He was weak," she spat during her testimony. "The bloodline needed strength, not sentiment." The magistrate showed her no mercy. She was sentenced to life imprisonment in a facility far from London, far from society, where her name would be forgotten. But for Ethan Rogers, recovery was slower and more complicated than simply removing a needle. The physical wounds healed within weeks. The psychological ones took longer. He flinched at sudden movements. He startled at raised voices. He expected punishment for things that weren't crimes, laughing too loudly, asking for second helpings, crying when hurt. But Amelia was patient, So gradually was his father. Scott Rogers, Duke of Carlisle, had always been a man of action and command. Gentleness didn't come naturally, but he learned. He learned to sit quietly beside his son's bed and simply read aloud. He learned to let Ethan come to him rather than demanding attention. He learned to apologize when he made mistakes, something dukes rarely did. One afternoon, 3 months after Charlotte's arrest, Scott found Amelia and Ethan in the garden. Ethan was laughing, genuinely laughing, as he chased a butterfly through the roses. "He sounds happy," Scott observed, joining Amelia on the bench. "He's learning what happy feels like," Amelia corrected gently. "It's different." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the boy play. "I've spoken with my solicitors," Scott said eventually, "about the future, about what's proper and what's not." Amelia's heart sank. She knew this was coming. The Duke couldn't keep a common governess in his household indefinitely, not without scandal. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'll make arrangements." "I'm saying this badly," Scott interrupted. He turned to face her fully. "Miss Pearson, Amelia, you saved my son's life. You showed me the truth when I was too coward to see it. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. I only did what anyone would have. No, you did what no one else had the courage to do." He took her hand carefully, as if asking permission. "The solicitors say that a duke cannot court a governess. Society would never accept it." Amelia's throat tightened. "I see." "But," Scott continued, a small smile playing at his lips, "society might accept a duke courting a gentlewoman of modest means who happens to serve as his son's companion, especially if that duke makes it very clear he intends to marry her eventually, scandal or not." Amelia's breath caught. "You can't mean—" "I do. If you'll have me, have us. I know I've given you every reason to refuse. I know the road ahead won't be easy. But I also know that I don't want to face it without you. Your Grace—" "Scott," he corrected softly. "When we're alone, I'm just Scott." "Scott," Amelia whispered, testing the name. "I'm nobody. I have no dowry, no connections, no—" "You have everything that matters," Scott interrupted. "You have integrity, courage, kindness. You have my son's trust and my heart, though I have no right to offer it after everything." "Amelia!" Ethan called from across the garden, running toward them with a daisy clutched in his small fist. "Look what I found." He climbed onto the bench between them, offering the flower to Amelia with a shy smile. "It's beautiful," Amelia said, her eyes shining with tears. Ethan leaned against her, comfortable and trusting. Then he looked at his father and, with careful deliberation, took Scott's hand and placed it over Amelia's. "There," Ethan announced, satisfied. "Now we're all together." Scott and Amelia's eyes met over the child's head, and something passed between them that needed no words. "Yes," Amelia said softly, answering the question Scott had asked. "Yes, we are." 6 months later, on a spring morning filled with flowers and scandal and joy, Miss Amelia Pearson became the Duchess of Carlisle in a ceremony that defied convention and delighted exactly no one except the people who mattered. Lady Agatha attended, of course, wearing purple and looking enormously pleased with herself. Inspector Hayden stood as a witness, having become an unexpected friend to the unusual family. And Ethan Rogers, healthy and happy and healing, served as the ring-bearer, walking down the aisle without a single tremor, his golden eyes bright with pride. The tongue whispered and judged and predicted disaster. They were wrong, because the Duke had learned that reputation without truth was worthless. And Amelia had learned that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with a first glance, but with a first truth, spoken when silence would have been easier. As for Ethan, he grew up knowing that he had been worth saving, worth fighting for, worth believing in. And that made all the difference. We've reached the end of this powerful story, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Kindly rate the video in a scale of 1 to 10. Did you guess Lady Charlotte was the villain from the beginning, or were you surprised? What would you have done in Amelia's position? Drop your answers in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who loves dramatic historical romances. And if you're not already subscribed to Duke's Royal Library, click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next scandal-filled story. We have so many more tales of mystery, romance, and justice coming your way. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak the truth when everyone else chooses silence. Until next time, this is Duke's Royal Library. Thank you.